My name is Rosemary Romero. I am a consultant based in Santa Fe, and the majority of my work is on mostly natural resource issues and strategic planning for nonprofits. I'm helping this afternoon facilitate this session and supported by Gabe Kohler from Forest Guild. So let me give you a little bit of background. This is the Santa Fe National Forest prescribed fire program, and it's an update. We do have a presentation from the Santa Fe National Forest staff, and it should only be, it's not going to take long, and we want to save enough time for questions. But if you could please hold your questions to the very end or get them into the chat, but we won't pull them into the dialogue while we're presenting. I know these are really, really tough times, and I want to acknowledge the friends and colleagues in the Mora San Miguel, the Calf Creek, Hermit's Peak area. We think often in finding ways to be supportive, and lo siento, I completely understand what's going on. So we're hoping to have a productive dialogue with plenty of questions, and at the end of the session, we do have some information where you can go to get more information or get your name on a mailing list. And with that, I'd like to introduce the Santa Fe National Forest speakers. And really appreciate you being here. So that we will have two speakers today. I'd like to first introduce Shaun Sanchez. He's new. He's not new to the Forest Service, but he's our Forest Supervisor on the Santa Fe National Forest, and really appreciate you being here, Shaun, and being willing to answer questions in open. I think this is going to be a very productive dialogue. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, and you can introduce yourself. I think I gave you too few words of encouragement, but I'm looking for a very productive dialogue.
Awesome. Thank you, Rosemary. And thank you for the introduction. Yeah, my name is Shaun Sanchez. I'm the Forest Supervisor here on the Santa Fe National Forest. This is just about to complete month 3 in my new role. Prior to the Forest Service, I worked for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as the Deputy Chief of the National Wildlife Refuge System in Washington, D.C., and have moved kind of all around the country, from Alaska to D.C. in the Southeast, and back home here to the Southwest. I grew up Mora, San Miguel County. We have a small ranch in Buena Vista, New Mexico, for those of you that know that part of the world, and went to high school and college in Las Vegas, graduated from Highlands University, and have been working for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for the last 22 years. And I wanted to just kind of share a little bit of my thoughts as far as priorities and what brought me here. I've always wanted to come back home to the Southwest, but given the traumatic fires of last year, very much made me want to be a part of coming back and helping to heal and recovering and restoring after that. And so made me want to come in and help the team here in the Forest Service and help our community. And so in doing that, my vision, and I've set with all of our forest leadership team, and what my priorities are. They're not very detailed, but it's more of our approach and vision for being a part of the community. And one is, for me, and I've shared, is that we need to know and relate to the community. That is really important, is to understand the community that we serve and the community that we're a part of. And then it's also equally, and sometimes frankly maybe a little more important, is to be a community asset. And people are expecting us to say to do what we say, and follow through on things. And so it's really important to be that community asset. I think today, I know today is a really difficult day for many people. There's, I think, 2 anniversaries that I think will be etched in people's minds for the rest of their lives. April 6th is when the Hermit's Peak fire escaped, and today, April 21st. And today was the day that the fires made really big runs. I don't know the exact acreage, but they burned 40,000 acres in one day. Today is the day that my parents had to evacuate from their home there in Buena Vista, and I know many of you that are here today likely had to evacuate as well. I can tell you we didn't schedule this meeting on purpose on today being such a meaningful day for many folks. Frankly, it was just the circumstances of scheduling and getting it going, but I really wanted to recognize the importance of today and the struggles that many of our community members are still going through. Anniversaries can be really tough. Smells, sounds can trigger memories that are not too happy, and so recognize that and want to share a little bit. And that's where we're getting to, why we're here today. In my short time, I've heard a lot. I've done my best to get out into the communities to talk to community leadership, gone to county commission meetings, gone to town hall meetings, and one thing that I've heard consistently is that people want to know that we learned from the fires of last year, and that we're doing better and being better, frankly. I think they want to know that we took meaningful review on what occurred last year, and that we're putting that review and that understanding into action. And that's what we're looking to do today, is to have Terrance share with you all our plans, because that's a very consistent question that we get. I want to, before I turn it over to Terrance, though, is really preface, though, that we have no intentions, no plans right now to do any prescribed burning in like Mora, San Miguel counties, in the Hermit's Peak, Calf Canyon, in that burned area. The prescribed burn activities that have been conducted this year and in the immediate foreseeable future are not in that part of the forest. The east side of Sangre de Cristos right now, our priority there is on healing. It's on the recovery, it's on the restoration. And so that's where our focus is, on that side of the mountain. So I didn't want that to come across, because we are talking about what we're doing different in our prescribed burn program, that there was an intent to start conducting prescribed burns in that part of the forest right now. Right now, that part of the forest, it's about healing, recovering, restoring, helping our community to get to a place where they want to be and where we want to be with them. So with that, I will turn it over to Terrance, and I believe he's going to go through and share, what are we doing differently? What are our plans in those areas of the forest where we are doing prescribed?
Thank you for that. And I'm going to take myself off the screen so we get a full screen of Terrance's presentation. And just as a reminder for folks watching this, it's on Facebook, and you can put your comments into the chat of Facebook, and then Gabe will be helping to monitor with folks. So thank you so much. And with that, Terrance, I'm going to just quickly introduce you, just to get you loading up the PowerPoint. But you're the Deputy Fire Chief, and you've worked for 25 seasons on the forest, and 22 of those, as I understand, have been on the Santa Fe National Forest. So with that, you can add more information, but I'm going to take myself off screen and turn everything over to you during this presentation, and then we'll open it up for Q&A.
So, afternoon, everyone. I'm Terrance Gallegos. I'm the Deputy Fire Staff here on the Santa Fe, and we're going to go through a quick PowerPoint here just to explain what we're doing both nationally with our prescribed fire and also locally here on the Santa Fe. So obviously we had the 90-day prescribed fire pause, and that was due to the tragedy that happened here, but also in other parts of the country, there were a few prescribed fires that were declared wildfires. And so the chief wanted to do that 90-day pause. And really that just gave us time to think about and address the events that have transpired here and across the country and our prescribed fire programs and how to move forward. So, typically in fire, we call this like a tactical timeout, right? So we've seen some stuff that occurred that needs to be addressed. So that's what that 90-day pause was about. The biggest change to our fire programs have been in the planning process. which includes, we're doing a new prescribed fire plan template. And so here on the forest, we're making sure that all our new burn plans are in this new fire plan template that they came up with because of the review. So we're making sure that that's occurring here on the forest locally for every burn that we have in our program. So we're rewriting those burn plans to make sure that they're meeting this new template. And so we have some new elements in the go, no go checklist as well, and a different approval process and briefing procedure. And we'll get into those specifics here in the slideshow. So burn plans, specifically before we resumed operations, we validated and updated our prescribed burn plans like I talked about. We ensured the information was current and that we're incorporating more recent science, the most recent science and modeling. So we're trying to not only do the stuff that we did before with modeling, which we always have. We've used modeling for all our burn plans in the past, but we're incorporating newer spatial modeling that's really beneficial. So we're trying to do that and make sure that all our burn plans have that new modeling, and we're taking into account the most recent science possible. So this slide here is actually an example of that new modeling process, and you can see on the screen here that we can actually use satellite data to help determine what kind of field models we have on the ground. And when I speak about field models, that's the material that's carrying the fire. So it could be timber, it could be grass, it could be brush, and they're actually displayed spatially here on this IFTDIS system, and that's Interagency Field Treatment Decision Support System. So that's the new kind of modeling that we're starting to use in our burn plans, and we're using here on the Santa Fe. So this is actually a pretty cool slide. This is some of that newer modeling I was talking about. And you can see the burn unit here, it's in orange. And then these red lines kind of show the flow paths of fire, like similar to water, but it actually shows the flow paths of fire and modeled under certain conditions and certain field models. And so you could spatially see, okay, this is our burn block here. This is actually a pile burn block. And then if a spot fire or something were to get into this drainage here, you could see that it would flow up drainage and impact some of these areas. So actually knowing that up front ahead of time before you even go to implementation allows for better burn plan writing. And like I said, we're incorporating this stuff into our burn plans. And so it really helps both the burn boss and the agency administrator see where this fire could possibly go if it were to get out of the containment lines. And then it also helps them beef up the burn plans so that they're putting people in the right positions, right? They understand that there's maybe some critical holding points here, or that drainage is really, really important to keep fire out of. And that's a big deal. That's a big deal. That's something that folks on the ground need to know. And that's something that needs to be incorporated into the burn plan. So we're utilizing this stuff here on the Santa Fe to really try to strengthen our burn plans, and then also strengthen our implementation when we go to implement, because we have a better understanding of where fire could move and potential values that could be impacted. So really cool model example here. So burn plans continue. So still sticking with the burn plan here. So on our more complex prescribed fires, we're implementing a new requirement to have additional personnel and equipment identified on the burn plan. These are called contingency resources, and they have to be within 30 minutes of the project area. And previously, they could be within a range. It could be 1 to 2 hours, say, for example, that those contingency resources could be away from these more complex prescribed fires. Well, now with the new changes, they have to be within 30 minutes. So they have to be within 30 minutes fire ready to come on out to the prescribed fire if they're needed. And so contingency resources are called when we need additional resources on scene to help stabilize the burn or potentially reinforce fire lines and mop up. And so the fire environment is dynamic, right? Even with all the best planning in the world, we're still dealing with weather, topography, things that can be out of our control at times. And sometimes we'll get a spot weather forecast and it's not exactly accurate. So we may see something or read something on paper. And then when we're actually on the ground implementing, we're seeing different conditions. And so when we start to see those different conditions that are maybe impacting our ability to have a successful prescribed fire, we can bring these contingency resources in to help stabilize that and potentially reinforce holding lines and help mop up. And so it's just that, it's that resource that is there to account for the unknowns, right? Because even with all the greatest planning in the world, sometimes forecasts aren't accurate, and there's always interplay between topography and fire and weather and fuels. So those contingency resources have always been part of our prescribed fire process, but now they have to be within a 30-minute time frame, which is good. Quicker response. So the burn plan also requires a patrol plan and a step-up plan, a long-term patrol strategy until the prescribed fire is declared out. And so previously, we really relied on experience of the fire management officer, the burn boss, the agency administrator to kind of determine, when they would go out and monitor the burn, how many people it would be. It was really based on experience, a lot of experience, and it still is. However, now it's written down in the burn plan. It's actually written down in the burn plan on what that patrol plan looks like. And so previously that wasn't really a requirement to the burn plans. And that's why we feel like it's really important here on the Santa Fe that we go ahead and update all our burn plans to these new burn plans to include these patrol plans and the step-up plan. And I have an example of the step-up plan in here, but just real quickly, it's based on a factor or a trigger out there in the environment that firefighters monitor. And so when that trigger is hit, the step-up plan in the burn plan identifies what resources need to come out to the prescribed fire. So the example I have in here is for a pile burn. If 50% of the snow leaves the area of the pile burn, so we don't burn piles unless there's snow on the ground in this burn plan. But if that snow were to melt and you got folks out there and you're starting to see 50% or less coverage of snow on the pile unit, and you're starting to see a pile maybe creep around or smolder, well, then that step-up plan kicks in right away in your burn plan, and it requires additional folks to come out. That's the trigger. That's the trigger for making that happen, and it's all written down in the plan. So it's not something that has to be discussed. It's something that can be acted on immediately. So 50% of the snow left the piles, boom, that creates this action of 10 folks have to be out there, and you have to order a piece of machinery or something like that. So that's just one example that I'll show you here in a minute. And so we get this question a lot. Prescribed fire is determined to be out when vegetation is no longer burning within the area. So that's the definition of calling something out. Locally, we're using drone infrared technology and handheld infrared technology to survey pockets of leftover heat and help in the mop-up efforts, and then also confidently being able to call out the prescribed fire. That's something that we learned from the Calf Canyon incident. That was a pile burn that had some residual holdover heat in it, and as much as those folks were out there checking it and feeling for heat and visually monitoring, obviously that infrared technology is a better tool where you can actually visually see the heat. So we're doing that here. We've done it on a recent pile burn in Cuba, and it was very successful, and I have some examples of that as well. So this is the step-up plan. This is right out of a burn plan. And you can see up top there, that's the trigger. 50% of the bare ground of the unit adjacent to slopes, the snow is missing, and you're seeing some smoldering or creeping in the piles. And so that's the trigger. That's what we call the trigger. And so that would trigger 10 more folks having to come out to that burn unit and help suppress whatever fire is out there and start mopping up. And it would also trigger ordering a dozer in this burn plan. So you would order a dozer, 10 personnel, and they would come out and they would deal with the creeping fire, the smoldering of the piles, because 50% of the snow has left the unit. We generally aren't concerned when there's snow on the ground, right? There's not a lot of cause for concern when the ground's covered in snow. So this is a logical kind of step to take in the burn plan, right? You see that the snow has left the area, 50% of the area, and it's like, okay, that's our trigger. Let's get some more folks out here. Let's order this piece of equipment. And then this table in here just shows the line production rate. Line production rate is how much line a dozer can put in at certain slope classes or slope percentages. So we have that in the burn plan, just so the burn boss knows, like, hey, this is how fast this piece of machinery can create line. So this is that IR imagery I was talking about. So the two pictures on top, you can see that those are machine piles. So those are the larger piles made by typically by some kind of thinning contract, or maybe some kind of logging contract for field wood or whatever that may be. And so you can see on the right there, that's without the IR. That's the drone flying above those piles, footprints there. You can see they look fairly cold, right? You don't see a lot of smoke coming off of them or any kind of open flame. But then when you look at the left side, you can actually see that the IR imagery did pick up a little bit of heat in every pile. And so you can actually see that. And that's a big advantage for crews, because they can go in there and address those certain piles that have heat in them, right? They can get in there and actually mop them up. And then these bottom two pictures, this is an example of the handheld infrared technology. Like I spoke about earlier, this was used this past winter on the Cuba Ranger District when they burnt a few piles around a community there. They had good community support to get rid of those piles because of the slash, and they've been monitoring them every day and going out there and checking them and mopping them up, and actually using a handheld device to see if there's any heat. And you can actually see the body heat of the firefighter coming off of there, as well as some of the heat that's in that pile. And this was done just a couple of days after they lit them, so you can see that there's still fairly significant heat in those. And that's a good tool for us, right? We can actually see where there's some residual heat where you can't always smell it or feel it with your bare hands. So, you know, this statement here just kind of goes back to that previous comment I had about fire being dynamic. You know, there's inherent risks with it, but we do know that prescribed fire can be used efficiently in reducing wildfire risk. We've seen it here. We've seen the Medio fire on the west side of the Sangres, right here outside of Santa Fe, interact with a prescribed fire that we did in the past, and it gave us a significant advantage in keeping that fire as small as we did. So we've seen it here. We know it works. And just regularly conducting those low-grade prescribed fires mimic nature, reduces the buildup of flammable vegetation and overgrowth. So going into the go, no go checklist. So the go, no go checklist is the mechanism. It's the actual mechanism that authorizes the prescribed fire to be implemented. And so there's some changes there that we'll highlight. You know, some of them, and we'll go through them, but you know, there's some changes in it in terms of authorization periods, the need to assess drought, and then also to analyze, you know, internal pressure, external pressure, fatigue, the qualifications of the personnel on the incident or the prescribed fire, and then their experience, right? So the reason that these were added is because there was a recognition from the reviews that there needed to be better and more line officer or district ranger engagement in prescribed fire, right? And having those meaningful conversations. And that's something that we obviously learned here as well, and that we're really trying to make sure that we're having those meaningful, robust discussions between the line officer, the district ranger, the FMO, the fire management officer, and the burn boss, right? And that we're capturing those things that we've learned from this 90-day pause and the tragedy here on the forest. So again, you know, the template discusses drought and a monitor that should be reviewed and included in the go no go process. It's got to be part of the discussion. And so here's an example of the actual go no go checklist, and you can see in the yellow there that it's highlighted that's something you have to look at. You have to get on the drought monitor site, you have to pull it up, you have to look at it in relation to your burn unit, and you have to consider it before you implement a prescribed fire. And so if you're seeing real dark red drought over your unit, you know, that needs to be a factor in the decision. And you can see on this form here that there's lots of things that need to be factored in. And these go no goes are not new. This is something that we've always done for every prescribed fire. There's just new elements to them, and the drought awareness is one of those elements that came out of the 90-day pause and the reflection on our prescribed fire program in the Forest Service. So again, here's another example of the go no go checklist. This is continuing on. This is right out of the go no go checklist, and this is what I was talking about earlier. Has the experience, qualifications, internal, external pressures, fatigue levels of implementation. Have they been evaluated? Identified concerns have been satisfactorily mitigated? And it's a yes or no. And so this is really meant to reinforce that line officer engagement, right? That line officer engagement with the burn boss, the FMO, and really talk through some meaningful conversations. You know, are you guys fatigued? You've been out on fire all summer long. How are you feeling? How are your personnel feeling? How many times have you been a burn boss? Have you burned a unit like this before? Have you been part of a prescribed fire like this that we're doing as a burn boss before? And so having those conversations is a big deal. And you know, the pressures, the internal, external pressures, those are obviously real. Those are things that happen, right? Folks can feel internal pressures or an external pressure from a partner to maybe get something done. And so you want to have those meaningful conversations amongst that party of decision makers, the line officer, the burn boss, the fire management officer. You want to have those good, robust conversations about that and make sure that you can mitigate them. So this is just, you know, a commitment from us to you folks. You know, on the Santa Fe National Forest, we're committed to ensuring that we have the most experienced, well-rested, and highest qualified individuals on all our prescribed fires. And we will ensure internal, external pressures are not the reason we implement a prescribed burn here. We talked about the new approval process. Previously, you could do a range. So the line officer could actually approve a prescribed fire for a couple of days. But that's no longer the case. It has to be every 24 hours now. And so every day they have to have that meaningful discussion on the go, no go, the checklist, all those things we talked about. Every day they got to do that and make sure that things are still going well, or if there's some issues maybe that they've seen from the previous day, are those issues able to be mitigated? And if they're not, then the prescribed fire doesn't go forward. It doesn't get authorized. And so that's a meaningful change, that these discussions and approval process has to happen every 24 hours. And we're doing that on this forest as well. This is just an example of the 24-hour authorization. I thought it was important to share some of these documents with you folks, just so you can see that it's actual, you know, documents that we go through, and burn plans are very lengthy documents, and we take them very seriously. So they do take quite some time, and this is just showing that authorization, that 24-hour authorization. So those are all the kind of the big changes that came out of the 90-day pause that every Forest Service unit follow, and that we're taking serious here and we're following. But we also implemented some local protocols. So locally now we require Forest Supervisor briefings before any prescribed fire moves forward. So the districts actually have to brief Shaun, and he has to approve them. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like here in the next couple of slides. But really that just ensures that all levels of the Santa Fe National Forest and organization are aligned and concur with the prescribed fire moving forward. So just to give you a little insight on the Forest Supervisor briefing, when a ranger district on the Santa Fe National Forest determines conditions are optimal to implement a prescribed fire, they must brief Shaun, and they must brief the fire staff here, which is myself and Lance Elmore. And the briefing requires the district ranger, district fire management officer, and burn boss to explain the operational plan of the prescribed fire, how they have involved the public, private landowners, and local cooperators in the process of the prescribed fire, and a detailed plan on how they will monitor the prescribed fire until it's declared out. And that's that definition we talked about earlier. And so that's a new local process here. And Shaun is taking the involvement of the public, private landowners, and local cooperators into the prescribed fire very seriously. He wants to know in detail how the local district ranger and the FMO and the burn boss have incorporated the community, private landowners adjacent to the prescribed fire, and also local cooperators and stakeholders and local government. So this just talks about what I just said. You know, we're making sure that there's new protocols in place to involve both the public and local stakeholders, cooperators, local government before and during our prescribed fires. So each community will be unique and will require varying degrees of engagement, right? Some of our communities are much smaller. Some of our communities are much larger, like Santa Fe, Los Alamos, Espanola. So we have some bigger communities, but it's going to be unique to each community, and where those public meetings are going to be needed, we're going to do them. That's our commitment to folks, and that's Shaun's expectation for us. So we're going to make sure that we're doing that engagement prior and during prescribed fire. The key takeaway is that the Santa Fe National Forest is committed to involving our local cooperators and the public in the process of our prescribed fire program. Okay, I think that's it, Rosemary. I'll stop sharing and we can maybe work into some questions, I guess.
Yes, and thank you, Terrance. As a non-Forest Service person, I appreciated the thoroughness and the clarity, and I hope that others watching this got the same, because it just really helped to affirm that it is different. So thank you for that. I have a couple of questions I wanted to pose for you, and then as folks are putting them into the chat, Gabe will be putting them into our format so I can transfer those to you. So how do you monitor the weather prior to prescribed fire and during?
So that's a good question. So depending on where the prescribed fire unit is, we have our zone weather that's produced out of the Southwest Coordinating Group. So we can actually look at the zone, right? And those are much bigger areas. And then days prior to and the day of implementing a prescribed fire, we actually get a spot weather forecast. So we get a forecast for the exact area that we're trying to conduct a prescribed fire in. And so that's really how we keep tabs on that. We look at the zone weather. We have some tabular data that we can pull up for daily updates on leading up to the prescribed fire. And then a day before, during, and then after, we can actually get a spot weather forecast from the National Weather Service that is very specific to the prescribed burn unit itself.
Good, good. And I know that some folks that are still thinking about questions. We'll be taking those shortly, but putting them into the chat will be helpful. And I'll get to those as soon as they come through. So I have a couple of other questions, Terrance, because I think it helps set a tone for things that you didn't cover that would be helpful. So what's the difference between pile burning and broadcast burning?
Yeah, so pile burning is when we actually set up some sort of thinning contract. They go into the woods and they'll actually thin to a certain prescription that we give them. And then they'll create slash, right? So they'll cut small trees, they'll cut limbs off of trees, and they'll make small hand piles. And so the hand piles are made, and then after they cure, that usually takes 7 or 8 months, usually for them to cure so that they'll consume. And then we wait for some kind of snow event or moisture event to cover the ground, and then we'll go in and ignite those piles and take care of the slash. Broadcast burning, on the other hand, is we'll look at a landscape, say it's 200 or 300 acres, and there's a 2-track road system all the way around it, basically creating a box, right, a containment feature around that 300 acres. And we'll actually go in with drip torches and we'll fire the entire 300 acres. So that entire 300 acres will have some sort of fire moving around in it, as opposed to pile burning, where it's kind of individual fires burning in the snow and they're not really moving across the landscape. So that's the difference there. Good,
thank you for that. And then how might these changes that you just walked us through, how will they affect the staffing or the Santa Fe National Forest Fire Management Organization going forward? I mean, this is a big change for staff.
Yeah, so I think with the new burn plans, we can definitely expect for the minimum organizations to be much larger. I think we'll definitely have more personnel, minimum personnel on the scene of our prescribed fires, and then probably a little larger contingency workforce planned in as also. But also regionally, they've really committed to building up our fields organization. So we have a very professional field staff here in Dennis Carroll that knows his job very well, and he's got folks under him now that can help with the fire and fuel side. So we've got more specialists on the forest now, helping us develop burn plans, helping us incorporate this new modeling, and making sure that we're doing everything we can to have the safest and most efficient fuels and prescribed fire program on the forest.
Good, thank you. How do red flag warnings influence the decision to burn or not?
Yeah, so when I talked about that zone weather, it's a bigger, much larger area, and typically you can get a red flag condition within a zone. So, I think there's been some misinformation about, the Hermit's Peak fire. There was no red flag warning within the zone or even in the spot weather, like I talked about the spot weather forecast for for the Las Despensas RX. So there was no red flag. There was red flag conditions east of there in another zone, and there was some red flag conditions in the Rio Grande Valley, but there were no forecasted red flag conditions on the actual prescribed fire itself. And so, but to just talk about that more, this forest has never conducted a prescribed fire with a red flag warning right over the top of the zone where the unit is. And so that's something that I wouldn't anticipate doing. There's no advantage to that. Sometimes, depending on the fuel model, like, if you're trying to burn sage, for an example, the higher the wind, the better. Just to move that stuff through the canopy of the sage, it's a very difficult fuel to burn. But we don't have those types of fuel types here, so we don't typically need any kind of high wind to treat the fuels that we have on this forest, right? We have PJ, pine, mixed conifer, and those are kind of the fuels that we try to target. The dry mixed conifer, we don't mess around with wet mixed conifer a whole lot, but yeah.
Good. And there's a couple of questions about the changing climate. So how are changing climate and higher than normal drought conditions factored into burn planning?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you know, honestly, this whole region has been conducting prescribed fire in drought conditions for quite some time. And I think the things that occurred last year and the things that we have learned from these tragedies is that we really do need to consider drought more extensively in our burn plan preparation, in the amount of personnel we need on prescribed fire, in our weather windows, in our fire modeling, including that in some of our new fire modeling that I discussed. So it's definitely something that is an impact, and we need to account for it and build our burn plans appropriately for it, and make sure that our prescribed fires are staffed appropriately for it.
Good.
And then making those hard decisions about not doing it. You know,
Right.
if there's a burn unit that's under a real dark red spot on the drought monitor map, then, you know, that needs to be a big consideration about whether we can actually successfully pull that off or not. Now, there's always local conditions that occur that aren't accounted in the drought monitors. So say we have a burn unit that is under some of that darker red drought, and 2 days before we got a half an inch of rain on it. Well, maybe that puts that prescribed burn unit in the conditions that we need to actually implement it successfully. And maybe there's a forecasted rain event afterwards that we can kind of utilize to help add additional moisture after we implement it. So there's lots of factors. It's not always just one, and it's not always as cut and dry as it might seem to be, but it's definitely something that implementers, line officers, burn bosses need to consider and understand before they implement a prescribed fire.
It's a broad spectrum of issues to be considered for sure. So what's the outlook for the 2023 fire season?
So actually, we got an update recently from Kerry Jones. He's a meteorologist here. He's actually here on the fire forest. He's our smoke program lead, but comes with lots of experience in weather. And they've been monitoring El Nino coming back, and they feel like that's a pretty strong signal, and that we may have a little cooler, wetter May, and maybe a little more moisture and less wind than we did last year. And so they're thinking the fire season might not be as active as last year. We'll have to see. What I always tell people is June is always a wild card. It doesn't matter how much moisture you get in the spring or the winter. Typically June in the Southwest can be fairly busy. And so we'll just have to see how those weather events come in May. If we have a little wetter May, obviously we've had some good snowpack, so that's going to delay things up high. But if we have a little wetter, cooler May, we might not be as busy in the region or here in New Mexico. So we're keeping our fingers crossed for that.
Good. So I'm looking at seeing if there's more coming in on the chat. And I think you may have covered this one, Terrance, but I think it's in one of the slides, is what are some of the steps that lead up to a prescribed fire treatment?
So there's lots of planning that goes in, right? We talked about the burn plan and how extensive that is, and they take some time to develop. And then there's also the NEPA side, right? Like we don't do prescribed fire on a piece of ground unless it's been covered by NEPA. So and typically we don't do a lot of first entry burning either. And so we like to get the ground covered, right? NEPA takes a little bit of time. It can take 2 to 4 years, depending on how much ground you're trying to cover or whatever. And then we try to incorporate some fuels projects in there to thin out the piece of ground that we're looking to do prescribed fire in. Obviously, that helps get rid of some of the fuels, and then also helps us be more successful when we're implementing prescribed fire. And then we get to the burn plan, and then we get to all the considerations of weather and drought and all the stuff we've been talking about, and the qualifications of personnel, and do we have enough folks on scene, and all those external internal pressures, and And then that's kind of the end state of actually implementing a prescribed fire. But it's a very long process if you include all the planning that goes into clearing the ground to actually implementing something.
Right, right. This one may have been answered in one of the slides as well, but maybe needs to be reaffirmed is what is the procedure for monitoring pile burning on the Santa Fe National Forest? And this is coming from Sam Hitt.
Yeah, so I did cover it in the slides a little bit, but I'll just reiterate. So we have the new step-up plan that I talked about in our burn plans. So that's part of that monitoring, right? If we're seeing one of those triggers get hit, then those extra personnel come in, and then also the handheld IR and the drone IR. So we're incorporating that into our prescribed fire program. We actually have a drone headed over to the Cuba Ranger District to take a look at those Deer Lake piles tomorrow. And so we're incorporating that infrared technology into monitoring our piles. Obviously, with last year's events, that new technology from the drone and handheld IR, it's very important, and we're utilizing it to make sure that residual heat in those piles are being taken care of before the snow comes off of there.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're also we're trying to get a lot of our pile burning done earlier in the year. So maybe late October when we get our first snow up high, November, December, January. If we could hit those months where the snowpack tends to stay around longer, that just gives us better chances for those piles to cool down and go out before the spring winds hit and the snow comes off in February and March. And so that's something else we're really keeping a close eye on, and we're trying to implement. And then obviously the IR, the step-up plan, the new burn plans that require an actual written patrol plan. Those are all mitigating factors that we're utilizing here on the Santa Fe to move our prescribed fire program forward.
Right. Yeah, I was impressed with the drone imagery that you showed earlier on the slide. It was the 4-part slide, and I think that's what you're referring to on the drone information that you're getting.
Yeah.
There's one here. I don't know where this came, who this is, but let me read it to you. Many communities in the area have extensive traditional knowledge, not necessarily rooted in science, data, and modeling. How do you plan to incorporate the local community's knowledge base, and when do they speak up or contribute to comments? Maybe just how do you plan to incorporate the local knowledge base, and when they speak up, how is that utilized?
Yeah, so I think that's that engagement part that I talked about that Shaun's committed about. And when we have these forest supervisor briefings back up to him, he wants to know that. He wants to know that local FMO and local district ranger have talked to folks like that, locals in the community, have gotten input, have communicated. That's super important to him. And if you guys haven't gotten to know your district ranger, you should try to meet him and get to know him, because that's a very good communication piece. And then Shaun wants to mention a little bit about this as well.
Great, thank you.
I think that's actually a really great question. And so, my vision and expectations of knowing and relating to the community, Terrance hit on, I would love for everyone to know who their district ranger is. On a first name basis. And, my expectation has been that, like all the community leadership definitely knows who their district ranger is, because they're attending commissioner meetings, they're having a relationship one-on-one. I just wanted to give, like my expectation on an upcoming project that we're working on the implementation. We're getting at the final stages of planning, and that's the Santa Fe Mountain Landscape Resiliency Project. And I think it goes right to this question of how are you going to incorporate community knowledge, input. And so what we're looking to is, once we finish this planning phase and we get to implementation, that we get everyone around the table that's wanting to be part of the conversation and help inform, and as we're developing those plans for implementation. In this case, we have the Santa Fe Mountain, the Fireshed Coalition. So that's one venue. And I've been meeting with community leadership here in Santa Fe and a lot of the folks that made comments to that project, and looking to establish that partnership, that relationship, so that they're helping us to inform the prescriptions when we're identifying it and making sure that we're trying to achieve, really as many objectives as we can, and taking that local knowledge, that local input, that local interest, and making sure that it's incorporated into those plans and those prescriptions.
Mhm. So, Shaun, I'll note, we had about 50 people attending, and which is great. You always want more, and you anticipate more, but I think 50 is a great number. And then we are going to show a slide where folks can have an email address to get to add information to that. But Facebook seems to be a really good way to get information out. The Santa Fe National Forest has a Facebook page. And I think this was advertised on the Facebook page. And I think you also said that it was advertised or there was some communication with a TV station. I think you mentioned KRQE, but those are really good ways to get the information out. And we'll keep trying harder because I think we can always do a better job of getting the information out right. But please note that you can write this email address down for questions or comments. We had quite a few comments, but also I want to note that, and the recording will also be on Facebook. And what I'll note is that Terrance did such a great job of explaining things that, for people who are the lay people who walk or hike and participate in other outdoor activities, we don't always know the technical pieces. And I thought that was really good. And I noted to him, I especially liked the drone information because it was, as my grandchild would say, it was awesome. So really want to thank folks for joining us. And if you have the follow-up comments, this is the email address. And we're going to share, and please, feel free to share the recording with your friends. I know some folks don't use Facebook, but, a lot of folks use Nextdoor Neighbor, which is I know I've used that here in Santa Fe, and it reaches about 10,000 people if you send the information to the whole list. Shaun, do you want to say any other closing remarks? Really appreciate that you took the time, and then Terrance's explanations were really clear, and appreciate that. And to Gabe Kohler for doing the background work. Thank you, Gabe.
Yeah, just would like to just say thank you for participating, and please, feel free to reach out with any type of questions, emails. It's our job is to be responsive and to engage and to communicate with the public that we serve. And so please don't hesitate to reach out and ask questions or provide us your comments and input. And thank you for taking some time today.
Absolutely, and kudos to you. It's great to have somebody from Las Vegas, Buena Vista area involved, and with that local knowledge, I think would be really important going forward. So thanks to your team, and thanks to folks who joined us. And please share the information, and appreciate everybody's diplomacy in asking the questions. I think that leads to better conversations. So with that, Gabe, if you could put up that slide one more time where that has the email address, but please let your friends know and share the information as best you can. Gabe, if you can't put that up, that would be great. And then we'll end the meeting. So thanks again for joining us. And with that, we'll end the meeting. Take care.